Okay, welcome to Keystone Vintage Auto Restoration. This is our first video. We're going to start by going over the current status of a Porsche 356B restoration that we have underway. It's going to be a lot of metalwork. So far, if you follow us on Instagram, you see that we've been fabricating mounts for our Celette frame bench. During the past weeks, the car has been sent out to acid dipping. We completely stripped it down, obviously, as you can see. And now it's back from acid dipping. The frame bench mounts are all completed, and we have begun to tear down some parts and mock up some new parts. And I'll go over a little bit about our thought process and how we start and what parts we focus on at each time. So when I was starting this project, there's designs for the frame bench mounts from Porsche, but there's no drawings that were available, so we created our own drawings in CAD. Had them laser cut at a 20mm plate and then machined all the pins. We did some things differently than a lot of the mounts that we see online, and sort of did our own design with inspiration off the originals. So to show a bit of the front mounts, the angle of these is quite important. Obviously, the front suspension mounting points for the torsion bar tubes are slightly angled back, obviously for the suspension geometry. And we took that into consideration, of course, when designing this. So luckily everything went good. And when we got it back from acid dipping and put it on the crane onto the bench, we had a very flat plane through the whole vehicle, using the rockers as our guide for level. And we have the books from the original Porsche books on how everything should be. I have a couple extra holes because we didn't know exactly where the bottom plate was going to line up to the frame bench. If you look at other pictures, or if you've seen these in person, you'll know that plate does normally hang off the corner like that. The bench is universal to fit basically any vehicle, so depending upon vehicle specific mounts, they can land in a lot of different places. And obviously Celette has all the information available. They have mounts that you can rent, and then every vehicle has specific mounting apparatuses, you could say, that fit specifically for that suspension geometry. The originals also had scales that were on these, showing how far in or out that pin is, and they only have a single shoulder. The suspension tubes actually have a triple shoulder. So what we did is design from the Porsche measuring pins, which have two shoulders on them and are quite a bit longer. The Porsche measuring pins, to determine if these tubes are parallel to one another, is you put those two pins in, and then you have basically a small surface plate with contact to 4 different points on those pins that will tell you if anything is out of geometry. The frame bench mounts only go in about 2 centimeters or so. So even though we're not pulling on this particular vehicle with any sort of hydraulic rams, it's not out of specification in terms of the mounting points for the suspension. It just has a lot of corrosion and rot. I still wanted to give more of a purchase into those tubes and just further guarantee that we won't twist anything, or everything is perfectly aligned throughout the restoration. So these go in about 7 or 8 centimeters back to the furthest step. We'll see if we can pull one out. No, it got too much weight on it. But they're cross pinned, as you see, which comes right past. I actually got lucky because this was sort of a guesstimate when milling where that hole should be. But we got lucky that we just have a couple of millimeters past that tube to get the pins in and out. And it works very well. Once we mounted it, the intention is to paint these in the future, but we mounted it and they're working just fine. You know, without paint, that doesn't affect their function. So we will paint them probably when we're done with the project, or at some point if we have some time over. But right now the focus is to get the car underway. So those are the front mounts. The other side is just a mirror of that. In the back, You have a easier setup. It's just a single pin with a post. All of these are cross pinned. These obviously come from Celette that you see. We have the whole Celette mounting systems, but all of these are Porsche specific. And there are some differences between 356A, B, and C. So you have to be careful if you're looking at these to exactly what dimensions you need. For example, this extra post in the middle there is not actually needed on this particular car. We had put that in based upon the Celette drawings, but it turns out that the B model does not require that. And again, this is just an exact mirror to the other side. And in the back, you have two posts which are mounted to where the hoop for the transmission or the transaxle and engine sit. And these were just some, you see there's an extra hole. There's no function of that hole. That's just some stock that we had over that doesn't affect the functionality of that piece. So we used the material that we had on hand. And here you see the other side. So currently the car is acid dipped. As you can see, it's completely clean. Acid dipping is good and bad. It really removes absolutely everything from the vehicle. But with a lot of overlap panels, if you're not very careful to clean everything out well, you can have problems in the future. Shut that off for a second. You can have problems in the future with acid leaching out between panels. You can see some here where you still have some leaching out that's dripping down. And we're cognizant of this. We're going to go through everything and make sure that everything is neutralized. But basically, this entire car is being rebuilt from the ground up. So there's any of these panels are going completely removed. There's not going to be any overlapping plates. And we have the availability to get in between everything and clean it out so there is no acid. If you're working with a car that isn't as bad of a condition, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend acid dipping if you're not sure that you can get all of the acid out of it. Sandblasting is a lot rougher and it does a lot of damage on panels because quite honestly, the majority of people that do sandblasting on cars, for the most part, there are people that know what they're doing, but for the most part, they're doing it on industrial applications and it heats the panel up, it'll warp it terribly, and the money that you might think that you save on sandblasting in the beginning of a restoration will cost 10 times more to try to fix warped panels or basically destroyed panels. So try to stay away from sandblasting as much as possible. In this scenario, it's the best option to have it acid dipped, and it just gives us the cleanest working environment and the best opportunity to see the exact condition of the car. When you look up through panels, especially after acid dipping, it's really obvious of how thin the metal is and how much work is needed. So although some panels initially might look like they can be saved, there actually isn't much savable on this vehicle with the exception of the monocoque, you can call it, or the unibody, the firewall, even though the engine's in the back, the dashboard, in the inner rockers, and the seat, tub, and roof. But the whole front of the car, with the exception of the hood, and the whole rear of the car, with the exception of the engine cover, will be changed. So all of this is getting cut off. It's just basically the rear, the bottom of the frame, and in the front and back that's going to be saved. So far, what we've taken out is the floor. As you can see, the center tunnel. The tubes, if you're not familiar with Porsche, with the engine in the back, all your controls have to go forward. And there's some things like brake master cylinder and or brake pedal and throttle wire and things like that that run through these tubes, shifter cables, fuel lines, etc. And the way that these are produced from the factory is they are all soldered in place, those tubes. The tubes are in very good condition, so we remove the hump from the top, which we're going to replace the lip on it. You see it has an original lip like this on the end pieces. These two end pieces will get welded back on, and then we're going to refabricate the lip for the bottom of this, and then weld those back on. And we already have some holes pre-drilled before it was taken out of exactly where it lines up with Cleco's. And then we can re-weld the mounts for those tubes at the various locations. And we have a big sandblaster, so everything that, even though it's already been acid dipped, if it's smaller parts like this, sandblasting helps as well to give the surface a better etch, a little bit more texture. And for inside panels like these, we'll put a good rust preventative paint, an epoxy, before everything goes back together, and then a a weld through primer on everything. We normally use U-Pull product or Volvo. This is a U-Pull Weld 2. They have a 2 zinc and a 2 copper. Quite honestly, I don't recognize much of a difference between the two of them, besides the color. But as far as weldability, when you're doing plug welds, they both work equally well. That side of the rocker, we fabricated the inner rocker, the supports, and the outer rocker. Everything's Clecoed in and ready to be welded in, but we won't weld everything in until this side's also complete and the floor and everything's mocked up. So yesterday we were removing the remainder of this. We have this side. We have a couple of parts, mock-up parts, that the heater tubes go through. They look like this one. And that's what the heater tubes for the cabin heat are mounted through. So here you have one that's savable, and then this will get mounted there. And there's another hose, rubber hose from there to a metal piece, and another rubber hose in the middle. So kind of a strange design that it was captured in there and completely non-serviceable, because the original Porsche ones were like a fabric material that completely rot away. So this is unfortunately the only way, if you had an issue with those, to fix them is to cut your rocker panel open. And then there's 3 overlapping plates. So you have the inner rocker, the outer rocker, these 2 supports, your jack point, and then the outer sill that obviously sits on the outside. We've been slowly taking things apart. That's sort of critical, especially when a vehicle is in this bad condition, because you don't have that much information from one side of the vehicle to the other. So you might have more metal in this area here than on the other side, and basically everything is almost always mirrored. So we save as much as possible here and use this information to replicate parts for the other side. What we're doing today now is starting a YouTube channel. That's one thing. And the other thing is fixing these pots in the rocker. So you see where there's some things cut out there. That's when we just cut out the rough parts of the rust, and then we'll make some replacement pieces, bend those up, TIG weld everything in, and we should be in a good scenario by the end of the day to test fit the floor and part of the hump. We're going to be working on making the flange for the part of the hump. Here you see already what it looks like. This blue line just indicates where we need to trim down that inner rocker panel that was produced. Now we have one small piece in that corner. So I'm going to try to keep as updated as frequently as possible. With the channel, I think it might be easiest to do some time lapses. I'll try to set up the camera and just work, and then just clip it down to a smaller segment. So if you're interested, you can follow the channel. It's Keystone Sweden, and then we have obviously Facebook and Instagram, Keystone Sweden as well. And the website's keystonesweden.com. So follow along and keep track of the Porsche. Then on top of this, we have a Porsche Targa, a Volvo P1800, a 66 Chevelle, 55 Bel Air, a lot of different projects in the waiting right now. So it should be interesting. Thanks, everybody.